The Weight of Choosing, featuring Sophie Quinn and Aaron Bartlett. The moment Aaron Bartlett walked into the boardroom and set his resignation letter on the mahogany table, face up, so every person in that room could read the words he had spent 3 days rewriting, the silence that followed was not the kind produced by shock. It was the kind produced by recognition. 12 of the wealthiest, most carefully composed people in Chicago had just watched a man choose love over a $3 billion inheritance, and not one of them could say with honesty that they would have done the same. His mother pressed 2 fingers to her lips. His brother stared at the letter like it had personally insulted him. Victoria Langton, 62 years old, a woman who had once described sentiment as the leading cause of fiscal irresponsibility, simply looked out the window. Nobody said a word for 11 seconds. Aaron counted. Then he turned, walked to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 36 years. This story does not begin in that boardroom. It begins 6 months earlier, at a charity gala in a hotel ballroom in Chicago, where a neurosurgeon named Sophie Quinn was doing the thing she did best, making powerful, comfortable people feel the precise and specific weight of their own comfortable uselessness. She had no idea that the man she was about to dismantle would be the same one, 6 months later, handing back $3 billion for the right to love her. Hello Hearts and Billions family. I'm Harry, the creator behind the Hearts and Billions channel. Before we dive deeper into today's story, I just want to check in with you for a moment. How are you doing today? And be honest with yourself. How is life really going? Whatever your answer is, just know this. You're not alone in it. There are so many people out there quietly fighting their own battles, just like you. And even though we're all in different places, we're all trying to keep going in our own way. If today was good, I'm happy for you, truly. Hold on to that feeling. If today was hard, I'm with you in that too. And I want you to remember that hard days don't last forever. You are capable of more than you think. You are resilient in ways you may not even recognize yet. And no matter how slow things feel, you are still moving forward. Keep going. You're closer than you think. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this amazing story. Chapter 1. The Woman Across the Room. The Harrington Grand Hotel's ballroom had a chandelier situation. That was the only way Aaron Bartlett could describe it. 17 crystal fixtures descending from a 40-foot ceiling, each one throwing prismatic light across 1,200 square feet of curated generosity. Somewhere between the oyster station and the silent auction, actual human need had been converted into a tasteful evening of expensive understatement. Aaron stood near the back with a glass of sparkling water he had no intention of drinking, performing the one skill he had perfected over 36 years, being present without being there. The Bartlett Foundation Medical Gala was his mother's annual contribution to the illusion that wealth, when sufficiently well-dressed, could also be a virtue. He played his role impeccably, the handshake, the warm chuckle, the attentive nod at whatever a senator's wife was explaining about her foundation's work in Tuscany. He was good at this. That was the part that disturbed him most. He was scanning the room with the particular vacancy of a man counting down minutes when he saw her. She was standing near the hospital representative's table, and she was arguing. Not arguing in the way gala guests sometimes argued, which was to say not arguing at all, just performing mild disagreement in dulcet tones. She was gesturing with both hands, and the administrator across from her had adopted the posture of a man trying very hard to appear open-minded while backing slowly toward the exit. She wore a black dress that had no business making every other outfit in the room look like it was trying too hard, but it did. Aaron noticed the dress for approximately 1.5 seconds. The rest of his attention was on her eyes, which communicated something very specific. I have given this exact speech 17 times this year, and every single one of you has nodded politely and done nothing, and I would like you to understand that I find this personally offensive. He started moving before he decided to. He caught fragments of her words as he approached. 60% reduction in wait times if we implement intake reform. 60%, and the pilot data is already there. I'm not asking you to fund a concept. I'm asking you to fund a proof of concept that already worked. The administrator said something apologetic, gestured at someone across the room he apparently needed to speak to urgently, and extracted himself with the practiced grace of a man who had been doing this to people like her for 20 years. She watched him go. Erin watched her watch him go. The expression that crossed her face lasted less than a second. Raw frustration, quickly buried, quickly replaced by the composed calm of someone who had learned not to let rooms see her tire. Then she turned and nearly walked directly into Erin's chest. "Erin Bartlett," he said, extending a hand before she could speak. "I overheard part of that. The 60% reduction, that's not theoretical." She took his hand briefly. Her handshake was the handshake of someone who had spent a decade correcting for the fact that people underestimated her. Dr. Sophie Quinn, neurosurgeon, Northwestern Memorial. And no, it's not theoretical. We ran an 8-month pilot at our satellite clinic in Englewood. The data is published. Anyone can read it. She paused. They just don't. Why did he walk away? Budget optics. Our clinic serves a community that doesn't photograph well for donor newsletters. She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "Mr. Bartlett, I've done my research on your foundation. 47 million distributed last year. Incredible galas. Lovely press releases. I feel but arriving. Almost no measurable long-term outcome change in any of the communities you claim to serve." She tilted her head slightly. "So, are you here tonight to actually help people? Or are you here to feel good about the fact that you could if you wanted to?" Erin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That," he said slowly, "is the harshest thing anyone has said to me at one of these events. And I once had a senator tell me my grandfather's portrait looked aggressively smug." Sophie Quinn did not smile exactly. Something in her expression shifted. "I'm a neurosurgeon, Mr. Bartlett. I spend my days performing extremely precise work under high pressure with very little margin for error. I don't have the bandwidth for social padding. How much would the clinic cost?" She studied him with the focus of someone who had learned to distinguish genuine interest from polite deflection. "To open the first one properly, 2 million, possibly 2.2. For a model that can be replicated. Tell me the full plan." "You're serious?" "I'm asking, aren't I?" She told him. For the next 22 minutes, while the gala continued around them in its choreographed generosity, Sophie Quinn described her vision with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it not to impress funders, but because she believed every word. Clinics embedded in underserved neighborhoods. Preventive care infrastructure. Top-tier physicians at accessible rates. A staffing model that compensated fairly without bankrupting the operating budget. She spoke about her patients, not as anecdotes for donor engagement, but as people. A 7-year-old with a tumor that could have been caught 18 months earlier if his family had been able to access a specialist. An elderly woman on 4 medications who couldn't afford 2 of them and hadn't told her doctor. Erin listened. He was aware, distantly, that this was not how he usually spent galas. "Here," Sophie said, producing a card. "If you're serious, call. But don't make me wait 3 weeks for a maybe. People are dying in the meantime." He took the card. Their fingers barely touched. "What if I told you I haven't had a drink tonight? That I find these events approximately as meaningful as you clearly do? Then I'd say call me sooner." She stepped back. "Good night, Mr. Bartlett." His mother appeared at his elbow before Sophie had taken 6 steps. Catherine Bartlett, silver-haired, architecturally composed, observed Sophie's departure with the careful expression of someone pricing a painting she has already decided not to buy. "Christopher Aldridge is looking for you. His family just pledged $2 million to the foundation." Erin was looking at Sophie's card. "Tell Christopher I'll call him tomorrow." "Erin, good night, Mother." He left the gala at 9:15, which was unusual. He sat in the back of his car, and held Sophie Quinn's business card and thought about 60%. Then he told his driver, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Huron Street. He didn't go in. He sat outside for 35 minutes watching the emergency entrance. A woman came through the doors carrying a toddler who was limp with fever. 2 teenage boys helped an older man from a rideshare. A paramedic team moved with the clipped, coordinated urgency of people who did not have the luxury of urgency being optional. This was what Sophie Quinn saw every day. Aaron Bartlett, who had spent 36 years attending beautiful events about other people's suffering, sat in his car and felt something he could only describe as shame. Not the performative kind, but the quiet, clarifying kind that actually changes behavior. He called her office at 9 the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. "I sat outside your hospital last night," he said. "For half an hour." A beat of silence. "Why?" "Because you told me to see what you see." "I'm trying." He paused. "I want to help. Actually help. But I need you to show me how." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you free tomorrow morning?" she asked. 6 a.m. "In the morning?" "That's when rounds start, Mr. Bartlett. If you want to see what I see, you see it on my schedule." He arrived at 5:50. She was already there, white coat over scrubs, looking like someone who had been awake for 2 hours and was somehow more alert for it. She looked at him, this man in a cashmere coat outside a hospital at 6 in the morning, and something in her expression shifted incrementally. "You actually came," she said. "I told you I would. Rich men say that constantly." She turned toward the elevator. "Fair warning, you're going to see things that are uncomfortable. I'm counting on it." Chapter 2. What she sees. Aaron had been inside hospitals before. He had cut ribbons at hospitals, donated wings to hospitals, attended galas for hospitals. He had never been inside a hospital the way Sophie Quinn lived inside one. She moved through the wards with the specific fluency of someone for whom this space was not a backdrop, but a native language. She knew every nurse by name and 3 personal facts. She knew which residents needed encouragement and which needed to be told they were wrong before they hurt someone. She knew where the good coffee was hidden. It wasn't where the sign said. And she knew which elevator ran 12 seconds faster than the others. Aaron followed her through morning rounds feeling approximately as useful as a decorative lamp. The first patient was a 63-year-old man named Gerald who had delayed a follow-up for 8 months because the copay kept conflicting with his grandchildren's school fees. The issue that had been manageable 8 months ago was now requiring intervention. Sophie explained this to Aaron afterward in the hallway, clinically but without distance. The way someone describes a pattern they have seen so many times it has become grief dressed as statistics. "He had insurance," Aaron said. "He had insurance," she confirmed. "That's the part people don't understand. Insurance doesn't mean access. It means the paperwork is different." The second patient was a 14-year-old girl who had been brought in by her mother at 2 in the morning after the girl had complained for 3 weeks about headaches. Sophie had found the scan results that morning. Aaron watched Sophie explain the findings to the mother. Gently, precisely, without the clinical detachment that might have made it easier for the mother but would have made it dishonest. Sophie held the woman's hand when she started to shake. In the break room afterward, over coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a different decade, Sophie asked him without ceremony, "So, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I've been donating to the idea of this rather than the reality of it." He turned the cup in his hands. "I'm thinking you were right about everything you said at the gala." "I usually am. It hasn't helped much. I want to fund the clinic. The full amount." Sophie set down her cup. "Mr. Bartlett." "Aaron. Aaron." She said his name like she was trying it out for fit. "I've had 12 conversations like this one. 11 of them ended with a follow-up email explaining why the timing wasn't quite right." "What happened with the 12th?" "He came through. Half the amount. Enough to run the pilot. That's where the 60% data came from." She paused. "He pulled the rest of the funding 6 months later when his company had a bad quarter." Aaron nodded slowly. "So, I need to prove I'm not him." You need to prove you're not any of them. She met his eyes directly. I'm not trying to be hostile. I'm telling you what this work requires. It requires people who don't disappear when the novelty wears off. Then let me keep coming. Show me more. Let me understand what I'd actually be funding. She studied him with that diagnostic precision for a moment. 5:30 tomorrow morning, she said. Pediatric wing. He arrived at 5:20. She was already there. This continued for 3 weeks. Aaron Bartlett rearranged his calendar with the same decisive efficiency he applied to acquisitions. Early mornings at Northwestern. Long afternoons reviewing the clinic proposal documents Sophie had been compiling for 2 years. Documents so meticulous they would have impressed his own financial team, which said a great deal, since his own financial team was impossible to impress. Evenings reviewing data. Board meetings attended via the phone his assistant held at arm's length because Aaron was, technically, still in the car leaving the hospital. He learned things that restructured his understanding of the city he had lived in his entire life. He learned that the distance between 2 Chicago neighborhoods could represent a 15-year gap in life expectancy. He learned that affordable in healthcare was a relative term that bore no relationship to actual affordability. He learned that a physician's willingness to work in an underserved community was not the limiting factor. Pay and infrastructure were the limiting factors, and neither was insurmountable with genuine investment. He also learned that Sophie Quinn had a laugh that she kept carefully rationed, deployed only when something was genuinely funny rather than merely polite, and that when it arrived unexpectedly, it was the single most disarming thing he had encountered in 36 years of being charmed by people who were trying to charm him. She was not trying to charm him. That was the difference. He fell in love with her slowly, and then the way people fall off things they didn't realize they were standing on, suddenly, completely, with no dignified way to describe the landing. He didn't tell her. He told himself it was because the timing was wrong. The reality was that Sophie Quinn was the first person in his adult life who made him want to deserve something before claiming it, and he wasn't certain he did yet. On a Friday evening at the end of his 3rd week, as they were reviewing site plans for the proposed clinic location in Englewood, Sophie put down her pen and said, with the directness that by now he recognized as her default register, "You keep showing up." I said I would. People say things. She looked at him. "You've rescheduled 3 board meetings this week. Your assistant called mine twice to coordinate your schedule around hospital hours." A pause. Why? He chose honesty over strategy. "Because this is the first thing I've done in years that I actually believe in." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was casual. Then she picked up her pen. "Dinner," she said. "There's a Haitian restaurant in Bronzeville I go to when I've had a week that deserves it. Friday counts." Is that an invitation? It's a suggestion. You can treat it however you like. He treated it like the most important thing anyone had said to him all year. Quick pause. If you are loving this story, please like and share this story to help us gain more visibility, and subscribe to the channel to join this amazing family. God bless you. Chapter 3. Bronzeville. The restaurant was called Belle Rêve, which translated loosely as Beautiful Dream, which Aaron thought was either the most or least appropriate name for a place where Sophie Quinn ordered in Haitian Creole and argued passionately about the correct rice-to-bean ratio with the owner's wife, who argued back just as passionately, and both of them were smiling the entire time. "You come here often," he observed, once they'd settled into a corner booth. "My grandmother lived 3 blocks away. We came every Sunday." Sophie looked at the menu she clearly didn't need. "She died 2 years ago. I come here when I need to feel close to her." He didn't rush past that the way people sometimes rushed past grief in conversation, the nervous pivot to something lighter. He waited. "Tell me about her," he said. Sophie looked up, briefly surprised by the absence of a topic change. Then she settled back. Celestine Quinn came from Haiti when she was 23 with $60 in a suitcase and the absolute unshakable conviction that her children would go to university, which they did, all 4 of them, Because she worked 18-hour days for 25 years and simply refused to accept any other outcome. She paused. She used to tell me, "Sophie, baby, comfort is not the same as safety. Don't confuse them." A small smile. She was also hilarious. Sharp as anything. She would have taken one look at you and asked what you wanted. What would she have thought I wanted? Probably the same thing everyone wants from women who look like me and have what I have. To borrow credibility. To feel less guilty about money. Sophie said this without malice. Only the matter-of-factness of someone describing geography. She would have been wrong about you. Or partly wrong. I'm still working out the fraction. Aaron turned his water glass slowly on the table. What fraction are you at? 60% convinced you're genuine. She tilted her head. Maybe 65. What would move me to 70? Time. People behave differently when something gets hard. She looked at him. You haven't experienced anything hard yet. The hospital mornings are uncomfortable, but they're also interesting. The clinic project is exciting. You haven't had to sacrifice anything real. He thought about his brother's call that morning. A pointed inquiry about whether Aaron was still planning to attend the Ashford Capital dinner. He had declined. His brother had used the word optics 4 times in 90 seconds. My family knows I've been spending time at the hospital, he said. They have questions. What kind of questions? The kind that start with surely you don't need to be there personally, and end with something about brand alignment. He paused. They don't know about you yet. Sophie nodded, something shifting in her expression. When they find out, what do you think they'll say? My mother will be careful. My brother will be direct. He met her eyes. My brother will use the word appropriate. Oh. She said it quietly, and in that single syllable he heard the weight of a woman who had spent her entire career entering rooms where people assessed her before she'd spoken. So we're the inappropriate option. That's not what I think. I know, but it's what they'll say. She looked at her food. Aaron, I've been in this situation before. Not this exact situation, but adjacent ones. Where someone from a very different world decides I'm extraordinary enough to make an exception for. And it feels real, and I think it is real, for a while. And then the world they live in starts applying pressure, and suddenly the exception becomes too expensive. She looked up, and the extraordinary thing about me turns out to be something they wanted to believe in rather than something they were willing to fight for. The honesty of it landed without cushioning. I understand why you'd assume that, he said carefully. I don't have a way to prove otherwise except by showing up differently than those men did. And I can only do that over time. Yes, she said. You can only do that over time. They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but that had weight. The weight of 2 people acknowledging that they were standing at the edge of something without quite stepping off yet. The owner's wife brought dessert without being asked. 2 small plates of griot with plantains, along with a look at Sophie that communicated a great deal without words. She likes you, Sophie said, watching the woman retreat. She doesn't bring the griot unless she likes someone. High praise. Very high praise. She once made a city councilman pay for his own plantains because he talked over her during the order. Aaron laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that catches people off guard. And Sophie watched him with an expression he was learning to read, the slight narrowing of eyes that meant she was revising her percentage upward. Walking back to her car afterward, the September air cooled off the lake. Sophie stopped at a corner and turned to face him. I have a boundary I need to state clearly, she said. Because I think we're heading somewhere, and I would rather name it than pretend we aren't. He waited. I don't do halfway. I don't do let's see what this is. I don't do being someone's private experiment and living authentically while they maintain everything publicly as it was. She held his gaze without flinching. If this is something, it's something completely. Or it's a professional relationship and a very good friendship, which I would value. But I need to know which. The city moved around them, indifferent. Aaron Bartlett, who had spent 36 years being strategic, decided to be honest instead. I'm in love with you, he said. I've been in love with you for at least 2 weeks, and I've been trying to figure out whether I'd earned the right to say it. I'm not certain I have, but I'm not going to lie to you, because you'd see through it anyway, and I'd feel terrible." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Well," she said finally, "at least you're efficient. Is that a yes?" "That's a I need 48 hours to think, because you just appended a working arrangement I valued, and now I have to decide whether the risk is worth it." She paused. "Which I will think about honestly." "That's fair. Most things I say are." She started walking again. "Good night, Aaron." "Good night, Sophie." He stood on the corner and watched her reach her car, and when she got in she glanced back once. Quickly, the way people check something they don't want to be caught checking, and he felt the fraction move. 68 at least. Chapter 4. 48 hours. Sophie called him 31 hours later. He knew the exact number because he had absolutely not been counting. "I decided," she said. "I assumed. I'm going to need you to understand several things before I agree to anything." The word agree was very Sophie, specific and contractual, clarity over romanticism. He found this more endearing than he could reasonably justify. "I'm listening. I am not a project. I am not a narrative. I'm not your redemption arc or your authenticity experiment or any of the other shapes that women like me get poured into by men in your position." Her voice was measured. "I am a neurosurgeon who has spent 11 years building a professional reputation in a field that required me to be twice as precise and 4 times as unflappable as my colleagues to be taken half as seriously. That person is who you're committing to, not an idea of her." "Understood. The clinic work stays professional. Whatever this is between us doesn't blur the professional work. The clinic matters too much." "Agreed." "And Aaron," a pause, "if you wake up one day and realize this has become too expensive, socially, professionally, with your family, I need you to tell me. Not manage me. Not let me figure it out from behavior. Tell me directly. You have my word." "Your word is an undeveloped asset," she said. "But I'll give it time to appreciate." He smiled at his phone screen. "Is that a yes?" "That is a provisional yes contingent on continued evidence." "I can work with that." "I assumed you could. You're an acquisitions man. You're used to conditional terms. Usually the terms are less honest." A beat. "Then, there's a jazz club in Hyde Park. Saturday. Meet me there at 8. He was there at 7:40. She arrived at 8:03, wearing a green dress that he had never seen before and would think about for an unreasonable amount of time afterward. And when she saw him standing near the door she said, "You were early." "I was precise." She walked past him. "Buy me a drink, Bartlett." For 6 weeks, they existed in a geography of their own construction. They chose places where the overlap between their worlds was minimal: Hyde Park, Pilsen, Bronzeville, the South Shore. Not hiding, exactly, but not announcing. Sophie was direct about the logic. "I don't introduce people to my world until I know whether they belong there. My world doesn't give second chances to people who disappoint it." Her world was nothing like what Aaron had expected, and everything like what he should have expected. Her parents, her mother a retired schoolteacher, her father a jazz bassist who played Tuesday nights at a club in Bronzeville, received him with the specific courtesy of people reserving final judgment. Her mother, Diane, offered him coffee and asked him 4 careful questions that were each actually asking one more complicated question. Her father, Roland, simply watched him across the kitchen table and then said, "You play anything?" And when Aaron admitted to a defunct alto saxophone habit, Roland had nodded as though this confirmed something. Sophie's colleagues were warmer and more direct. Her fellow attending, a surgeon named Dr. Felix Okafor, no, wait, a surgeon named Dr. Henry Brandt, treated Aaron with the cheerful skepticism of someone who had watched Sophie be disappointed before and was determined not to invest in the outcome prematurely. The ICU charge nurse, a woman named Patrice Holloway, simply told him on the second time he appeared in the break room, "If you hurt her, I know where you park your car." That's a very specific threat, Aaron said. I'm a very specific person, Patrice said, and went back to her paperwork. Aaron arranged to transfer $2 million to the Clinic Foundation. He did it through a restructured grant process, creating a new funding vehicle within the Bartlett Foundation that the board could not easily veto. The clinic planning moved into active development. Sophie worked on it in every gap between surgeries, between rounds, between everything, and Aaron worked alongside her and felt, for the first time since his father died, like his money was connected to something that mattered. One evening, reviewing zoning documents at Sophie's kitchen table, he looked up and found her watching him with an expression he hadn't seen before. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." She looked back at her papers. Then, "You're different than I expected." "Better or worse?" "Different." A pause. "Better, probably. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation for adversarial precision." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked at their hands, then up at him. "I keep waiting for the part where this becomes complicated," she said quietly. "It will," he said. "I know." She didn't pull her hand back. "That's the part I'm afraid of." "Me too." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "Okay," she said. Just that. It was the most he had ever felt from a single word. The photograph appeared on a Thursday. A freelance photographer who covered Chicago social events had caught them leaving a wine bar in Wicker Park at 10:30 on a Wednesday night. Aaron with his jacket over his arm, Sophie laughing at something he'd said, both of them unaware. The photo had been sold to a Society column's digital feed with the caption, "Bartlett Foundation CEO's Mystery Companion." By 6 the following morning, Aaron had 47 missed notifications. His mother called at 6:12. He picked up on the third ring. "Good morning, Mother." "Aaron." Catherine Bartlett's voice was the particular kind of composed that required effort. "I'm looking at a photograph." I assumed. "She's lovely." "Who is she?" "Her name is Dr. Sophie Quinn. She's a neurosurgeon at Northwestern. We've been seeing each other for several weeks." He paused. "Before you say what you're about to say." "I wasn't going to say anything yet," Catherine said. "I was going to ask you to come for dinner tonight." That was, Aaron thought, considerably more unsettling than whatever she'd planned to say. Chapter 5. The Family Speaks. The Bartlett estate in Lake Forest looked exactly the way estates that had been in families for 4 generations looked, as though tasteful maintenance had replaced all evidence that time was passing. The grounds were impeccable. The furniture was the kind that appeared in certain museums. The flower arrangements in the front hall had been executed with the precision of documents requiring legal signatures. Catherine Bartlett met Aaron in the library, and his brother Garrett was already there. Garrett Bartlett was 41, ran the Bartlett Group's East Coast commercial division, and had married a woman whose family connections were, in their mother's vocabulary, appropriate. He had the bearing of someone who had never once in his life wondered whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. Aaron had always found this both impressive and slightly exhausting. "Sit down," Catherine said. Aaron remained standing. "Old habit, recent reminder." "I'll tell you what I told you on the phone," he said. "Her name is Dr. Sophie Quinn. She's a neurosurgeon. She's brilliant and driven, and I'm in a relationship with her, and I'm not here to justify that." "Nobody asked you to justify anything," Garrett said, in the tone of someone who was about to ask him to justify everything. "We just want to understand the situation. The situation is that I'm dating someone. Someone whose funding proposal you approved through a restructured grant vehicle that bypassed the standard review process." Garrett leaned forward. "Aaron, the board has questions about your judgment. The grant was sound. The clinic will save lives. The process I used was legal and within my discretionary authority. It looks like you created a mechanism to fund your girlfriend's project. I created a mechanism to fund a project with a 2-year evidence base, published pilot data, and a 60% outcome improvement metric." Aaron kept his voice level. The fact that the project director is also someone I'm in a relationship with is a conflict of interest I disclosed and managed appropriately. You disclosed it to whom? Catherine asked. To myself and my personal attorney. Since I own a controlling interest in the foundation, that is, technically, the extent of my disclosure obligation. Technically, Garrett repeated, with the emphasis of a man who felt this was precisely the problem. Aaron, Catherine's voice shifted from composed to something more careful. I'm not questioning the merit of the project. I'm telling you that certain people have called this family in the past week with concerns. Which people? Victoria Langton. Aaron had been expecting this name. He had been expecting it the way you expected rain after a week of clouds. Not with surprise, but with the particular fatigue of preparedness. Victoria Langton sat on 4 partner boards, controlled $230 million in institutional investment, and had opinions about everything she perceived as disordering the social categories she had spent her entire life enforcing. What did Victoria Langton say? She said your recent choices indicate a shift in values that she finds concerning for the foundation's long-term credibility. She said, Aaron translated, that she doesn't approve of me dating a black woman. The word fell into the room precisely. Catherine did not flinch, but something around her eyes tightened. She expressed concern about optics. She expressed bigotry in the vocabulary of professional concern. Those are different things, Mother, even if the packaging is similar. Aaron moved toward the window. What are you asking me to do? We're asking you to be thoughtful, Garrett said. To consider your responsibilities to the company, to the family. I'm thoughtful. I have been thoughtful. I've thought about nothing else for 6 weeks. Aaron turned. Here's what I've thought. I've spent my entire adult life attending the right events with the right people, funding the right initiatives, being photographed with the right expressions. And I have been profoundly, persistently unhappy. Sophie Quinn is the first person who has made me feel like my life is connected to something that actually matters. I'm not ending that relationship because Victoria Langton finds the optics inconvenient. If she pulls her investment, Garrett began, then we adjust. The foundation doesn't rise or fall on Victoria Langton, but it is affected by broader perception. Then the broader perception can catch up with the actual year we're living in. Aaron looked at his mother. What do you really want to say? Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to say that I know what it is to feel this way about someone. And I also know what it costs. The sentence arrived differently than he'd expected. Then you know I can't walk away, he said. I know, she said quietly. I'm asking you to be careful. To protect yourself. To understand that what's coming will be harder than what's already been. I know. Does she know? He thought about Sophie's voice on the corner in Bronzeville. The fraction she was building toward. The patience she had learned to apply to people who required time to prove themselves. She knows, he said. She's been preparing for it longer than I have. He left at 9. His brother followed him to the door. You're making a mistake, Garrett said. No malice. Just certainty. You've been wrong before, Aaron said. Not about this kind of thing. Garrett. Aaron looked at his brother. When was the last time you did something that scared you? Garrett had no answer for that. Aaron drove back to the city. His phone showed 12 missed calls from Foundation board members, 2 from his personal attorney, and 1 from Sophie. He called Sophie. I need to tell you something, he said when she answered. I figured, she said quietly. I saw the photo. My family had an intervention tonight. How did it go? About as expected. A pause. Sophie, they're going to make this difficult. I assumed they would. Her voice was steady. Aaron, I'm not going to pretend I'm surprised. I've been waiting for the part where reality catches up. I know. I'm telling you anyway. You deserve to know what's coming. What is coming? Pressure. More photographs. Public commentary. Board members with convenient concerns about my judgment. He paused. A woman named Victoria Langton who controls a lot of money and has a lot of opinions. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to fold? No. Are you sure? Yes. Another pause. Okay, she said. Then let it come. He exhaled. I'll see you tomorrow morning, she said. 6 a.m. I'll be there at 5:50. Obviously, she said, and he could hear the fraction moving. Chapter 6. The weight of other people's opinions. The comments section of the Society column article ran to 412 responses before the publication disabled comments. Erin read none of them. Sophie read 6, and then closed her laptop with the particular decisiveness of someone cauterizing a wound before it could spread. Don't, said Patrice Holloway, appearing in the break room door. I stopped, Sophie said. Good. Patrice poured herself coffee. The ones online are cowards. The ones you'll meet in person, less so. That's the part to prepare for. Sophie had spent 11 years preparing for variations of this. She had been looked through at conferences, looked past at grand rounds, looked at with the specific kind of assessment that requires a person to justify their presence in a room before they've had the opportunity to open their mouth. She had learned to enter rooms with her credentials visible, not because she needed the reminder, but because other people apparently did. What she had not entirely prepared for was doing it while also being someone's relationship. Because the looks, when they came, would not just be assessments of her professional authority. They would be assessments of her private life, her choices, her worth as a companion for a man with money. And those looks landed differently. They landed in places the professional armor didn't cover. She went home that evening, changed out of her scrubs, put on the jazz record her father had pressed in 1987 that smelled permanently of his studio, and sat on her apartment floor with her back against the couch, and let herself feel the weight of it for exactly 30 minutes. Then she got up, made tea, and called her mother. I saw the photo, Diane Quinn said, immediately and without preamble, because she was her mother. I know. He's handsome. Mother. I'm allowed to notice things. How are you? Complicated. Sophie tucked her feet under her. His family is unhappy. His board is making noise. There's a woman named Victoria Langton who apparently controls enough money to matter, and she has opinions. Diane was quiet for a moment. And what does he say? He says he's not walking away. Do you believe him? Sophie thought about Erin at 5:50 in the morning, in the pediatric ward, watching a child receive a diagnosis with the focused, sober attention of someone who understood that witnessing clearly was the least you could offer. She thought about him reading her clinic documents at midnight, asking questions she hadn't been asked in 2 years of grant applications. She thought about him on the corner in Bronzeville, saying I'm in love with you without the careful social engineering she'd learned to expect from men who wanted things from her. 68%, she said. Sophie baby, 68% is not a relationship. It's a probability exercise. I know, Mama. What would it take to get to 90? Time. Pressure. Watching what he does when it actually costs something. Diane made a sound of understanding. Your grandmother had a saying. She had several hundred sayings. This one applies. The tree that bends in the storm is showing you its roots. You can't see the roots until there's a storm, baby. Sophie leaned her head back. There's going to be a significant storm. Then watch the tree. She was watching the tree. She was watching it 2 days later when Erin arrived at the hospital with a folder containing the full restructured grant documentation and a summary from his personal attorney confirming that the Bartlett Foundation grant to the Englewood Community Health Initiative was legally unimpeachable. You didn't need to do that, she said. I wanted to document it. In case anyone suggests the grant was improperly structured, there's a paper trail that says otherwise. He set the folder on her desk. It also includes a conflict of interest disclosure I've added to my foundation records. Proactive, not reactive. She looked at the folder, then at him. You did this for me. I did it for the clinic. And yes, for you. He sat down. Your work shouldn't be vulnerable to narrative attacks because of our relationship. I want it protected independent of whatever happens between us. The word whatever landed, and she looked at him sharply. That's not what I meant, he said. I meant independent of any external pressure on us. Not internal doubt. He paused. I have no internal doubt. None. None. Steady. Direct. The way he'd learned to be direct with her, which was, she had noticed, different from his default mode with everyone else. She picked up the folder. Set it down. Victoria Langton called my department chair this morning. The shift in his expression was immediate. She did what? A courtesy call, apparently, to express her admiration for the clinic project and to inquire, with great care, about my professional standing and whether my work at Northwestern might be affected by any external distractions. Sophie's voice was precise. The subtext was not subtle. I'll call Langton today. You will not. She said it firmly. I don't need you to fight my battles with donors who have the emotional sophistication of an earlier century. I need you to understand that this is what I meant when I said you've never had to think about certain things. Because you've never been the thing someone used leverage against. He was quiet, absorbing this. What do you need from me? He asked. I need you to not make it worse by charging in. I handled it. I called my department chair back and explained the situation with full clarity, and my chair, to her considerable credit, told Langton that Northwestern's physician's professional standing was not subject to third-party review. Sophie paused. But I need you to understand that every time something like this happens, it will cost me something. Energy, concentration, attention I could spend on patients. And I need to know whether you'll keep asking me to pay that cost. Sophie, I'm not ending this. I'm telling you what I need you to understand. She met his eyes. You said you'd be honest if this got too hard. I'm asking for the same. If the cost to me exceeds the value, I need to be able to say so, without you interpreting it as rejection. He was very still for a moment. Yes, he said. Absolutely yes. Okay. She breathed. Okay. Can I do anything? You can show up tomorrow morning at 5:50 and let me teach you about periventricular white matter lesions because my resident is presenting a case and his understanding of the imaging is imprecise and I could use a second set of focused eyes. He blinked. I have no medical training. I know. That's not what I need the eyes for. I need someone who'll tell me honestly if my explanation is comprehensible to a non-specialist. She stood. See you tomorrow. He was there at 5:42. She pretended not to notice. He was better than she'd expected at the second pair of eyes job. He asked questions that clarified rather than complicated. And twice he caught places where her explanation assumed knowledge her resident didn't have. Afterward, in the hallway, she said, that was useful. Good. Don't look so pleased with yourself. I'm not. You are a little. He was a little. Chapter 7. The boardroom makes its move. The emergency board meeting was called on a Monday, which was, Aaron thought, a very board meeting kind of day. No agenda was attached to the calendar invite. Just his brother's name in the organizer field and a note that said, please arrive by 8:45. This is important. The invitation had gone out at 11:15 Sunday night, which told him two things, that they'd spent the weekend deciding to do this, and that they hadn't wanted to give him time to prepare. This last thing told him they still, after 36 years, didn't understand him. He arrived at 8:41, got himself coffee from the executive kitchen, and walked into the boardroom. 12 board members. His mother, positioned near the window with the careful neutrality of someone who had not yet decided which way to face. Garrett at the head of the table. And Margaret Holloway, the family's corporate attorney, which meant this was intended to be legal rather than merely familial, a distinction Aaron found clarifying. Good morning, Aaron said, and sat down. Not where Garrett expected, not at the far end, the position of someone being presented to, but midway along the side, which made it a meeting among colleagues rather than a hearing. Garrett noticed. His expression tightened. Thank you for coming, Richard Calloway, the board chairman, began. He was 68, a man who had known Aaron since Aaron was 7 and had always treated him with the specific warmth of someone who believed in you while expecting you to conform. We've all been paying attention to recent developments, and we felt it was important to address some concerns directly. I appreciate directness, Aaron said. Please continue. Your recent choices have raised questions about your focus. Margaret opened a folder. 3 missed or delegated board functions in the past month. 2 major presentations handled by deputies. A grant vehicle created to channel foundation funds through an expedited process. She looked up. And the personal relationship. I prefer to address the professional items first, Aaron said. The delegated presentations were handled by deputies who performed well, which is the point of developing capable deputies. The grant vehicle is legally sound, as my own attorney has confirmed in writing. I can provide that documentation now if it would be useful. That's not necessary. I'll provide it anyway. He slid copies down the table, which he had brought without being asked, because he had known this meeting was coming. The grant process was designed to allow rapid deployment for time-sensitive community health initiatives. It bypassed committee review because committee review takes 4 months, and the Englewood Clinic opening window is this fiscal year. Every funding decision made through that vehicle meets the Foundation's stated mission criteria. Garrett leaned forward. You created the vehicle specifically for this project. I created the vehicle based on a gap in our responsiveness to urgent community health needs that I identified during the past 2 months. That it was first used for a project developed by Dr. Quinn is a function of timing, not intention. He looked directly at his brother. If you're suggesting I invented a funding mechanism to serve a personal relationship, I'd encourage you to review the mechanism's design criteria, which were drafted before I had any personal relationship to protect. This was true. He had been careful about this. Sophie had, in fact, refused to let him expedite her grant until he could demonstrate the vehicle had been created for structural reasons, not personal ones. She had a very precise ethical framework. He was grateful for it. Aaron. Victoria Langton spoke from the far end of the table. She was 63 years old, steel-haired, with the air of someone who had decided 40 years ago that she was correct about everything and had been looking for evidence since. I'll be more direct than Richard. I expected you would be. You are in a relationship with a woman whose professional and social background is dramatically different from yours. I understand the appeal. I do not question the sincerity of your feelings. But I question the judgment of pursuing it so visibly, so rapidly, in a way that invites scrutiny. What kind of scrutiny, specifically? The kind that questions whether your philanthropic priorities have shifted from institutional merit to personal interest. She folded her hands. I had a conversation with your foundation's largest institutional partner last week. They have concerns. Did they authorize you to represent those concerns to this board? A pause. I was sharing information. You were using private conversations as leverage in an internal board meeting, which is a different thing. Aaron kept his voice entirely level. If my foundation's institutional partners have formal concerns, those concerns should be communicated through formal channels. If they're not comfortable doing that, perhaps the concerns aren't as significant as you're suggesting. Victoria's expression did not change, exactly, but something behind it recalibrated. The morality clause in your father's trust, Margaret began, is an extremely broad instrument that the trustees would need to invoke through a formal process, which my attorney has reviewed and which would require, at minimum, demonstrating behavior that constitutes actual reputational harm to the foundation rather than board member discomfort with my private life. Aaron looked at Margaret. I've read the clause. Carefully. Several times. Shall I summarize the legal exposure for the trustees if they invoke it without adequate cause? The room was quiet. His mother had not moved from the window. She was watching him with an expression he had seen only a few times in his life, the expression she wore when she was surprised by him. What do you want from this meeting? Garrett said finally. I want the board to fulfill its governance function, which is oversight of foundation operations, not oversight of my personal relationships. Aaron stood. The foundation is well run. The clinic grant is sound. My performance metrics are unchanged from last year. If there are legitimate governance concerns, I'll address them. If the concerns are about who I'm dating, I'll note them and disregard them. He picked up his coffee cup. Is there anything else? Garrett stood. Chris, if you keep this up. Garrett. Aaron looked at his brother directly. When was the last time you did something you actually believed in? His brother had no answer. He left the room, took the elevator to the lobby, and stood in the cold Chicago morning air for 30 seconds. Then he called Sophie. How did it go? She asked. Victoria Langton tried to invoke the morality clause by proxy. I explained the legal exposure to the attorney. The board didn't formally vote on anything. So a standoff. A standoff with a very clear direction. He exhaled. They're going to make this official next time. They're building a case. How long? My attorney says they'll need something concrete. A bad quarter. A major donor pulling out. Something they can frame as consequence. He paused. Victoria Langton will work on that. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? I'm fine. Are you okay? I'm in surgery prep. I'm not allowed to be anything except focused. A pause. Aaron, whatever happens, I need you to make decisions based on what's true for you, not based on what you think I want you to do. I know what I want to do. I know you know. I'm saying do it clearly. Not for me. For yourself. He thought about that for the rest of the day. That evening, he drove to Lake Forest again. His mother was in the garden when he arrived. Even though it was cold, she did this. Walked the garden in the evenings, had done it for as long as he could remember. He joined her without being invited, which she had also done for as long as he could remember. I want to talk about David Carlisle, he said. His mother stopped walking. Aaron, you were in love with him before you married father. I've always known. I'm not asking you to deny it. He looked at her. I'm asking if you regret it. Catherine Bartlett was silent for a long moment. The garden was very still. Every day, she said finally. Not in a way that undoes anything. Your father and I had a real life together. But I chose safety over truth, and the cost of that is a particular kind of loneliness that money does nothing for. She paused. David married someone else. Had 3 children. Died last year very ordinary and apparently very happy. Aaron looked at the garden. They're going to push harder, he said. I know. I'm not going to fold. His mother looked at him for a long moment. I know that too. She reached out and touched his arm, briefly. I can't fight the board for you. But I won't fight you either. A pause. She'd better deserve it. She does, he said. She absolutely does. Chapter 8. What the Storm Shows. Sophie performed 3 surgeries that week. A tumor resection, a spinal fusion, and a delicate decompression on a 12-year-old that took 6 hours and required the kind of sustained concentration that left her feeling, afterward, like she'd been wrung out and hung up in the cold. She came home to find Aaron at her door with food from Bell Ref. She stood in the hallway and looked at him and said, I need a shower and approximately 40 minutes of not speaking. I'll set up the food, he said. She showered. He set up the food. She came back in soft clothes and sat on the floor, because the floor was where she went when she needed to be closer to the ground, and Aaron sat across from her and ate without requiring conversation, which was the right call. After a while she said, the decompression went well. Good. The girl's mother was in the waiting room for 6 hours. I came out, and she grabbed my hands and couldn't form words for about 30 seconds. Sophie looked at her plate. That's why I do it. Not the surgeries. That 30 seconds. I know, he said. She looked at him. You've started to understand things I stopped expecting people to understand. You've been a patient teacher. I've been impatient and demanding, and I've told you at least 3 times that your questions are uninformed. And each time you answered them anyway. He looked at her steadily. That's what I mean by patient. She set down her fork. The board is going to do something official soon. Probably. What does that mean practically? It means they'll invoke the morality clause in my father's trust and attempt to suspend my distributions. or they'll call for a board vote to remove me as Foundation CEO for cause. He said this evenly, the way he'd been saying alarming things lately, without drama, just information. My attorney thinks they need another triggering event. Something concrete. Victoria Langton will arrange one. Most likely. Sophie was quiet. What would you lose if they went the full route? The trust distributions, roughly $3 billion, accessible over the next decade. My position at the foundation. My brother's goodwill, which is less financially significant but more personally significant than I'd prefer. He looked at her. My mother says she won't fight me. I believe her. Aaron. Sophie set down her plate and pulled her knees to her chest. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it as though I'm not in the room. That's an unusual request. Humor me. She met his eyes. If there were no me, if you had simply reached the same conclusion on your own, that you wanted your life to look different, that the foundation work needed to be real rather than performative, would you still choose this fight? He was quiet for a moment. Really quiet. Not the quiet of searching for the right answer, but the quiet of someone who already knows and is deciding whether to say it. Yes, he said. The fight has a shape that existed before you. You made it visible, but it was always there. He paused. The emptiness was always there. The feeling that everything I was doing was theater. You didn't create that awareness. You just turned on the lights. She looked at him for a long moment. 80%, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Progress. Don't get comfortable. 80 isn't 90. What's 90? I'll know it when I see it. 2 days later, Victoria Langton made her move. It was elegantly done, Aaron admitted to himself. Not crude. Not direct. Victoria Langton had spent 40 years in institutional philanthropy, and she understood that the most effective interventions were the ones that looked like something else. She arranged for a meeting between her foundation and the Bartlett Foundation's major institutional partners, a routine alignment discussion, the invitation said. And at that meeting, she presented a governance concern document that raised questions about the expedited grant vehicle, Aaron's conflict of interest with Dr. Quinn, and his recent patterns of absence from key meetings. The document was legally careful. It raised questions rather than making accusations. It did not explicitly mention Sophie's race or Aaron's personal life in anything other than professional terms. It was, Aaron's attorney said, a masterpiece of plausible deniability. 2 institutional partners announced they were conducting internal reviews of their relationship with the Bartlett Foundation. The announcement went public in a finance news brief. The foundation's board called another emergency meeting. Aaron called Sophie instead of going. They've made their move, he said. Tell me. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was her pattern when receiving information she intended to process fully before responding. How much is at stake? She asked when he finished. The 2 reviewing partners represent about $40 million in annual committed giving. If they pull out and it creates a domino effect, we're looking at a significant reduction in the foundation's operational capacity. And the trust. My attorney thinks they now have enough to invoke the clause. Not a guaranteed win if I challenge it legally, but enough to make the fight long and expensive. Sophie was silent for a moment. Aaron, I need to say something. Okay. I'm not going to tell you to fold. But I also can't be the reason you lose $40 million in charitable giving that goes to real people with real needs. That's not a romantic ultimatum. That's a practical reality. Her voice was steady. If there's a version of this where the foundation's capacity is protected and we still have each other, I need you to look for it. Not because I'm doubting you. Because the clinic and the foundation and the patients matter, and I need to know you've thought about them too. He sat with that for a moment. What if I resigned, he said slowly. As CEO, handed the foundation operations to an independent board, removed myself as the target. Would that protect the foundation? It might. The institutional partner's concern is about governance. If I remove myself from the governance structure, the concern loses its anchor. He paused. I'd lose the trust anyway. But the foundation, the clinic, they might survive intact. That's a significant sacrifice. You just told me the charitable giving matters. I agree with you. Sophie breathed. You'd walk away from your family foundation. I'd restructure my relationship with it. It was built on my grandfather's money. It doesn't have to be built on my control. He paused. I have my grandmother's trust. Separate from the Bartlett trust. Enough to live on and fund good work at a different scale. Aaron. Her voice had shifted to something quieter. Are you really thinking about this? I've been thinking about it for a week. I didn't want to say it until I was certain. He exhaled. I'm certain. Sophie Quinn, who had been waiting for the storm to show her the roots, was looking at the roots. Chapter 9. The choice before the choice. Aaron spent 4 days with his attorney. Not 4 consecutive days. 4 days punctuated by hospital mornings, a clinic design meeting, 2 foundation calls he delegated, and 1 dinner with Sophie where neither of them talked about the legal situation directly, because they developed a mutual understanding that some conversations required rest before they could be had cleanly. His attorney was a woman named Diana Torres, who had represented him for 7 years, and who had the particular quality of telling him things he didn't want to hear without apologizing for them. Best case scenario, Diana said, laying out documents across her desk on the 3rd day. You resign as CEO, you formally recuse yourself from the trust governance, and the board decides that removing you is no longer politically worth the effort because the institutional pressure point is gone. And the trust distributions? They may still pursue the morality clause. Reduced incentive without the optics battle, but Victoria Langton may push it on principle. Diana looked at him over her glasses. She's the kind of person who finishes what she starts. And if I don't resign? If I fight? You can fight. The morality clause is not airtight. Your behavior doesn't clearly meet the standard required for invocation. You haven't done anything genuinely scandalous. You've disclosed your conflict of interest. The grant vehicle is clean. A legal challenge would probably succeed eventually. She paused. Eventually. 2 to 4 years. Legal costs in the millions. Ongoing institutional disruption to the foundation throughout. The clinic. Diana set down her pen. The clinic is the most legally insulated element. It's a separate entity. Even if the foundation's operations are disrupted, the clinic's funding is already dispersed. Sophie's work is protected. Sophie's work is protected, Diana confirmed. He exhaled. There's a third option, Diana said. Full separation. You resign as CEO. You sign over your claim to the Bartlett Trust proactively, before they can invoke the clause, and you remove yourself from the equation entirely. They get what they want. The foundation continues. You walk away free. I walk away from $3 billion. You walk away from $3 billion in dispute and retain your grandmother's trust, which is entirely separate from the Bartlett estate and cannot be touched. You have approximately $40 million in accessible personal assets and a functioning income from your own investment holdings. She looked at him steadily. You'd be, by any reasonable standard, still very wealthy. Just not $3 billion wealthy. Correct. He looked out her window at the Chicago afternoon. And they'd stop. If you remove yourself completely, they have nothing to push against. The institutional partners lose their concern. Victoria Langton loses her case. Your brother gets the foundation governance he's been angling for. Everyone goes home. Diana paused. Except you. I go home to Sophie. Diana, who was professionally neutral about everything, allowed herself a very brief expression that might have been approval. That's the calculus, she said. He drove to the hospital. Sophie was between rounds, eating a granola bar in the hallway in the way she ate when she didn't have time to actually eat, which was her version of lunch on Tuesdays. I want to walk away from the trust, he said. She stopped chewing. Aaron, I've thought about it. The math is clean. Proactive surrender removes the leverage. The foundation is protected. The clinic is protected. I retain enough personal assets to live well, and keep doing meaningful work. And I'm free. He looked at her. I'm free of all of it. You're giving up $3 billion. I'm giving up $3 billion that came with a family who wanted to use it to control my life. He met her eyes. The $40 million I keep came from my grandmother, who died when I was 9 and left me a note that said use it for something true. She would have liked you. Sophie's jaw was doing something complicated. He had learned to read that expression. It was the one she made when she was trying not to be moved by something and failing. You can't do this for me, she said. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. He stepped closer. You asked me, on your floor, whether I'd still choose this fight if there were no you. I said yes. This is me proving it. The choice to leave a life that was making me miserable, that's mine. You just made it more obvious that I had the option. Erin. She closed her eyes briefly. This is irreversible. I know. You'll never be able to undo it. Good. Reversible decisions don't mean much. She looked at him. I love you, she said, for the first time, plainly. I don't say that as a reason for you to do this. I say it because I've been sitting on it for 3 weeks, and this seems like the appropriate moment. Something in his chest shifted in a way that had nothing to do with the legal documents he'd been reading for 4 days. I know, he said. I could tell. Could you? The way you started letting me eat breakfast in your kitchen instead of standing in the doorway. He tilted his head. And the way you told Patrice I was not entirely insufferable, which I have been told is the highest praise you award. Patrice talks too much. Patrice is a valuable source of information. Sophie made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, quickly, in the hospital hallway, which was a thing she had not done before. Public and uncalculated and real. Behind them, someone said, finally, loud enough to be deliberate. They both turned. Patrice Holloway was walking away with the studied innocence of someone who had absolutely planned this. I'm going to talk to her about professionalism, Sophie said. You're absolutely not, Erin said. No, she agreed. I'm absolutely not. He called Diana from the parking lot. Draw up the papers, he said. Full separation. I'll sign by Friday. Chapter 10. Friday. He signed the papers on a Thursday. Diana had them ready a day early because, she said, you seemed like someone who would prefer not to have an extra 24 hours to second-guess himself, which was accurate. The formal resignation letter to the foundation board. The legal instrument renouncing his claim to the Bartlett family trust prior to any invocation of the morality clause. The restructured governance framework for the Bartlett Foundation, creating an independent board that removed any family override. He signed each document with the quiet steadiness of someone burning down one building to clear the ground for another. Diana walked him through each signature point with professional neutrality. When the last page was signed, she organized the documents into their folders with the practiced calm of someone who had witnessed many significant decisions and understood that most of them looked, up close, like paperwork. Anything else? She asked. That's everything. Okay. She put the folder aside. For what it's worth, I've done this job for 22 years. I've seen people make decisions that looked like sacrifice from the outside and felt like freedom from the inside. She paused. This looked like both. He picked up his coat. Thank you, Diana. Don't thank me. Pay my invoice. She allowed herself a small smile. Good luck. He texted Sophie. Done. Meet me at Bell Rev at 8. Her response came 30 seconds later. I'll be there at 7:55. He arrived at 7:48. She was already there, at the corner booth, and she watched him cross the room with an expression that was not quite the diagnostic precision he was used to from her. It was something more open, more unguarded. You actually did it, she said. I said I would. I believed you. And I also, she paused. I held 10% in reserve. Prudent. Now I'm at 93. He sat down. What's the remaining 7%? Time, she said. The remaining 7% is always time. The owner's wife appeared, and set griotte and plantains in front of them both without being asked. She patted Sophie's shoulder and said something in Creole that Sophie answered, and then she was gone. What did she say? Aaron asked. She said, "Is this the one?" Sophie looked at her plate. I said yes. He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. They ate and talked and didn't talk, in the proportions that suited them. Sophie carrying the conversation when she had something to process aloud. Aaron listening with the particular quality of attention she had slowly recognized as his most valuable trait, the ability to hear what was under the words rather than just the words themselves. I have a question, he said, toward the end of the meal. Ask it. Are you scared? She considered this genuinely, the way she considered everything. Yes. Not of you. Of what happens when something this real gets tested by time. By ordinary life. She looked at him. You've given up enormous things. That creates a kind of weight. I don't want you waking up in 3 years feeling like you overpaid. Sophie, let me finish. She leaned forward. I've watched people in my family sacrifice for love. My grandmother sacrificed her entire country. My mother sacrificed a career in research to stay in Chicago for my father's music. And those sacrifices were real, and the love was real, and it was worth it. She paused. But I also watched them both carry it. The weight of what they'd given up. Not regret, just weight. And I want you to understand that I'll carry it too. With you, not for you. But it's there. I know it's there, he said. I'm not pretending sacrifice is nothing. I'm saying it's worth it. He squeezed her hand. And I'm saying I want to carry things with you, not be the thing you carry. She looked at him for a long moment. 95, she said. Moving up. Don't get smug. It's not 100. What would it take to get to 100? She thought about this with genuine seriousness. I think 100 is a number you reach slowly, she said finally. Over years. Over arguments and ordinary days and difficult moments and coming through them. She looked at him. I think maybe you can only see that you got there by looking backward. That sounds right. It's not a comforting answer. I find it very comforting, actually. Why? Because it means the work is worth doing. He looked at her steadily. I'm going to be here for the argument and the ordinary days and the difficult moments. All of it. I'd like to look backward with you, eventually, and see how far we came. Sophie Quinn, who had built her entire professional life on precision and evidence and measurable outcomes, sat across from this man she had not expected and felt something she could only describe as the sensation of a bet paying off. Okay, she said. Quietly. Completely. They left at 10:30. The night was cold, the lake wind carrying it off the water in long, steady gusts. I have surgery at 6, she said. I'll drive you home. You don't need to. I know. He held the door of the restaurant. I want to. She got in the car without further argument, which was, for Sophie Quinn, a significant expression of trust. In the car, she said, without looking at him, my parents want to have dinner with you. A real dinner. The kind where my father asks you difficult questions about your intentions, and my mother feeds you until you have to unbutton your jacket. When? Next Saturday. I'll be there. She looked at him sideways. He's going to ask you about the saxophone. Good. I've been practicing. She stared. You've been what? Your father plays jazz bass. I thought it would be respectful to at least remember the fingering. He kept his eyes on the road. I borrowed an alto from a music school in Wicker Park. I've been practicing for 2 weeks. Sophie stared at him for a long moment. That is, she said slowly, the most unexpectedly correct thing you have ever done. I have my moments. Don't make it a habit. It's unsettling when you exceed expectations. He smiled and said nothing, which was, she was learning, his version of being pleased with himself. Chapter 11. The boardroom again. The board meeting Aaron had not attended sent him a formal communication through Margaret Holloway the following Monday. A letter requesting his presence at an emergency session to address the formal restructuring of foundation governance, which was a very careful way of saying they'd called the session before they knew he'd already signed the papers. Aaron's attorney called the Foundation's attorney. The Foundation's attorney called Margaret. Margaret called Garrett. Garrett called Aaron. "You already did it," Garrett said. "Not a question." Thursday. A pause. The whole thing. The whole thing. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Mother knows. I called her Friday morning." "What did she say?" "She said, 'You're braver than I ever was.' And then she cried a little and told me to come for dinner on Sunday." Aaron paused. "I went." Another silence. "Chris." Garrett very rarely called him that. "You know this doesn't have to be permanent. If you and this woman, Sophie, if you and Sophie don't work out." Garrett. Aaron kept his voice patient. "I didn't do this because I was certain Sophie and I will be together forever. I don't know the future. Nobody does. I did it because the life I was living before I met her was a performance I couldn't sustain anymore, and the money was the mechanism of the performance." He paused. "The trust is gone. But I'm not asking for your permission to feel at peace about that." His brother said nothing for a moment. "You could have fought it legally," Garrett said. "You would have probably won. Probably. Over 3 years. While the Foundation took damage and the clinic became collateral." He exhaled. "This was cleaner. You gave up billions of dollars to be clean. I gave up billions of dollars to be free. The cleanliness was a side effect." Garrett made a sound that was somewhere between frustration and something that might, if examined carefully, have been respect. "She's going to call you," Garrett said. "Victoria Langton. She can call. She won't be kind. She's never been kind. She's been strategic, which is different." Aaron paused. "Tell her I said good morning." He hung up, and immediately his phone rang. He looked at the number, considered, and picked up. "Victoria," he said. "Aaron." Her voice was exactly as he'd expected, composed, frigid, the temperature of someone who had practiced being disappointed in people for several decades. "I've just been briefed on your decision. I assumed you would be. This was not the outcome I expected. I imagine not. You expected me to fight and lose, or to fold. I did neither." He kept his tone neutral. "I opted out of the game entirely. That is not." She paused, recalibrating. "Aaron, the Foundation will be well run under the independent governance structure I put in place. I specifically appointed directors with strong community health backgrounds, which aligns with the Foundation's stated mission." He paused. "The institutional partners should find the new structure reassuring." A long pause. "You did this deliberately," she said. "I did everything deliberately. That's something you might have credited me with from the beginning." He said this without heat. "Victoria, I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer honestly." A pause. "Ask. In your 40 years of philanthropic work, how many times have you deployed your capital to force an outcome in someone else's personal life?" Silence. "And how many of those times," he continued, "did the outcome you forced produce something genuinely good?" Victoria Langton said nothing for 8 seconds. "You made your point," she said finally. "I'm not making a point. I'm asking a question." A pause. "But I'll take that as an answer." He exhaled. "Your institutional review of the Bartlett Foundation, I'd appreciate it if you concluded it promptly. The work we do there is real, and it serves real people, and it shouldn't be delayed by a governance transition that is now complete." Another pause. "I'll review the new structure," she said carefully. "Thank you." He meant it, and she could probably hear that he meant it, which might have been the most unsettling thing about the entire conversation. "Have a good week, Victoria." He hung up. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a moment, engine off. Then he started the car and drove to the hospital. Sophie was finishing her last case when he arrived. He waited in the lobby with coffee, 2 cups, one black, one with a precise amount of oat milk that he'd learned without being told. And when she came through the surgery wing doors and saw him standing there, she stopped. "How did it go?" she asked, crossing to him. Garrett called. Victoria Langton called. Both conversations went approximately as expected. He handed her the coffee. "I think the storm is passing." She took the coffee, looked at him over the rim. And I feel like I can breathe. Still, the same as last Thursday." He tilted his head. "Which is how you know it was the right call." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. "My father said something about you," she said. "After the Sunday dinner. He called me Sunday night." She looked at her coffee. "He said, 'That man listens the way a musician listens. He hears the space between the notes.'" She paused. "My father does not say that about people. He hasn't said anything like it since he said it about my mother." Aaron was quiet. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand what you're walking into," Sophie said. "My family doesn't do halfway either. If you're in with all of them. The Sunday dinners and the Tuesday jazz nights and my mother's very specific opinions about how you should be eating more and my grandmother's anniversary, which we still observe even though she's been gone 2 years." She met his eyes. "You're not just choosing me. You're choosing all of it." "Sophie." "Yes. I've been choosing all of it since the second Tuesday morning I showed up at your hospital at 5:50 and your father's old record was playing from your phone because you play it when you're preparing for a difficult case." He looked at her steadily. "I've been paying attention." She looked at him. 97, she said. "Progress. Last 3% takes longer." "I've got time," he said. "Turns out I have a great deal of time now that I don't have to attend board meetings." She laughed, the real laugh, unrationed, unguarded, and several people in the hospital lobby turned to look, and Aaron thought that was fine. That was more than fine. Chapter 12. The clinic opens. The Englewood Community Health Initiative opened on a Thursday in March, which was Sophie's choice of day. "Mondays feel too much like a statement," she'd said when they were discussing dates. "Thursdays feel like something that was going to happen anyway." The clinic was nothing like the sterile, aspirational architecture of the rendered images in grant proposals. It was a converted storefront on South Halsted that had taken 8 months of work to make functional, over Sophie's supervision and Aaron's coordination, and a rotating cast of volunteers that had grown from 6 to 43 without anyone formally organizing the growth. The floors were real hardwood. The waiting room had good light. The examination rooms were properly equipped. It was neither glamorous nor inadequate. It was exactly right. Sophie arrived at 6:15 for a 7 o'clock opening, because she was constitutionally incapable of not arriving first. Aaron arrived at 6:22, with coffee and the clinic's first patient intake forms, which he had personally reviewed for clarity because, as he'd explained, if a patient can't understand the form is wrong. "You reviewed intake forms," Sophie said. "The previous version used the phrase comorbid conditions in plain language questions," he said. "I changed it to other health conditions you're managing." She looked at the revised form. "That's better." "I know. Don't be smug about medical documentation." "I'm not. I'm just right." The first staff member arrived at 6:30, a family physician named Dr. Marcus Chun, who had left a group practice in Lincoln Park after reading about the clinic in a local health journal and emailing Sophie 3 paragraphs about why he wanted to be part of it. 2 nurses followed. A social worker. A medical assistant. By 7, the clinic had 6 staff members and 4 patients already in the waiting room. Sophie stood in the doorway between the waiting area and the clinical space and watched it happen. Aaron stood beside her. "You're not going to cry," he said quietly. "I'm absolutely not going to cry. Because it would undermine your established professional persona." "Exactly." A pause. "I'm a little going to cry," she admitted. "I know." He put an arm around her shoulders, briefly. "Me too." The first patient seen that morning was a woman named Edna, 67, who had been managing a blood pressure condition with medication she could only sometimes afford. She left 2 hours later with a structured management plan, 3 months of subsidized medication, and a follow-up appointment. She stopped at the door on her way out and turned back and said to no one in particular, "This is a good place. This is going to be a good place for people." Sophie heard this from the hallway. She went into the supply room and spent 90 seconds being briefly human about it, then returned to work. Aaron was in the waiting room helping a man named Theodore sort through the insurance documentation he'd brought in a plastic bag because he wasn't sure which papers were relevant. Aaron had, apparently, developed a working knowledge of insurance documentation over the past 2 months. "You learned insurance documentation," Sophie said, when Theodore had been taken back to an examination room. It kept coming up. Aaron shrugged. By 5 o'clock, the clinic had seen 31 people. Of those, 14 had not had a primary care visit in over 2 years. 8 were managing chronic conditions without adequate support. 3 had conditions that required specialist referrals they would not previously have been able to access. None of these numbers were, individually, enormous. Collectively, they were 31 people whose trajectory had changed. Sophie stayed until 6:30. Aaron stayed with her. When the last staff member left, they sat together in the empty waiting room in the chairs meant for patients. Real chairs, comfortable ones. Sophie had been specific about this, and looked at the room. "One clinic," she said. "One clinic," he agreed. "The pilot data from the first year will let us apply for replication funding." She looked at the ceiling. "If the outcomes hold, we could open a second within 18 months. I've already started identifying sites." She turned her head to look at him. "Of course you have. You'd have been disappointed if I hadn't." "I would have been surprised," she corrected. "Disappointment implies expectations. My expectations of you have been fully recalibrated." "To what?" She considered. "Consistent." A pause. "I expect consistency from you now." "I didn't expect to." He looked at her in the quiet room. Outside, South Halstead was doing what it always did. Alive, uninterested in symbolic moments, completely itself. "Sophie, I want to ask you something." He turned toward her. "I've been working out how to ask it for 3 weeks, which is unusual for me because I'm usually direct." She waited. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "Not today necessarily. Or soon. I'm not asking you to set a date or plan anything or make any decision faster than it should be made. I'm asking whether the question itself is one you'll consider." He paused. "Because I've been afraid that asking it would frighten you, and I've realized that being afraid of the question is exactly the wrong reason not to ask it." The waiting room was very quiet. Sophie looked at him. "You've been carrying that question for 3 weeks, she said. "Approximately. And you asked it today? In an empty clinic waiting room. After a 14-hour Thursday. I know it's not particularly romantic." "No," she said. "It's exactly romantic. For us." She held his gaze. "The question itself, I will consider. With full seriousness, over appropriate time, with the rigor it deserves." "That's a yes to considering." "That is a yes to considering." She paused. "Which is not nothing." "It's not nothing," he agreed. She reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for today. For everything that made today possible." "Thank you," he said, "for making it worth being possible." They sat in the clinic they had built together, in a neighborhood that had been waiting for this, and let the day settle around them. Chapter 13. Something true. They married on a Saturday in May, 8 months after a charity gala in a hotel ballroom, where Sophie Quinn had told Aaron Bartlett he was attending the wrong kind of event for the wrong kind of reasons. She was right about that. She had been right about most things. He had stopped finding this surprising and started finding it one of the more reliable features of his life. The ceremony was held in a community center in Bronzeville, not because they couldn't afford elsewhere, which was a question some people would ask and none of them would ask to their faces, but because Bronzeville was where Sophie's grandmother had lived, where Belle Rev was, where her parents had spent their best years, where the music and the food and the particular texture of Sophie's life had its deepest roots. Aaron had suggested it before she could, which she had told no one, but which had moved her considerably. Her father, Roland Quinn, walked her down the aisle. He had worn his good suit, the one reserved for gigs where he wanted the audience to understand that this mattered, and he had played a piece on his bass in the anteroom before the ceremony began, which was not planned and which produced an effect on everyone who heard it that was neither planned nor entirely explicable. Catherine Bartlett sat in the third row. She had come alone. Garrett had sent his apologies, which was a more honest reflection of his position than attending under the wrong pretenses. She had brought flowers from her garden, which she had placed at the clinic's entrance the previous day without telling anyone, and which Sophie's mother had noticed and mentioned quietly to Sophie, and which Sophie had mentioned to no one else. Diana Torres attended. Patrice Holloway sat in the second row and cried before the ceremony began and was unapologetic about it. Dr. Henry Brandt, Sophie's colleague, sat next to Patrice and maintained a composure he would later describe as professional and which was in fact quite thin. The front rows were full of people Aaron had met in the past 8 months, patients who had found him in waiting rooms and hallways, and who had come to understand, without being explicitly told, that he was connected to the work in some important way. Clinic staff, hospital colleagues, members of the Community Health Advisory Board Sophie had assembled with the same methodical precision she applied to surgery. Aaron's people were fewer. Some old friends from before, the ones who had remained when remaining required no sacrifice. His personal attorney, who sat in the back with the expression of someone attending a professional function she was unexpectedly glad to be at. His mother, in the third row, alone. He looked at her once, before Sophie appeared, and she met his eyes and her expression was many things at once. Grief and pride and something that he understood, with the clarity of a man who had spent 8 months learning to understand complicated women, as the particular sorrow of someone watching someone else live the life they hadn't. He looked away before she could compose it. Then Sophie appeared at the far end of the aisle. She was wearing a dress that was elegant and considered and entirely her own. Ivory silk, clean lines, nothing that required the event to justify it. Her hair was down, the way she wore it on days that were not professional, on days that were personal. Her father walked beside her with the bearing of a man who understood the weight of what he was carrying. Aaron had written his own vows. He had drafted them 12 times over 3 weeks, which was 11 more times than he usually revised anything, and the final version was the shortest one, because he'd learned that the most true things tended not to require extensive elaboration. When the moment came, he took her hands. "Sophie," he said, "you told me, the first night we spoke, that you'd spent your career performing precise work under pressure with no margin for error. I've watched you do that. I've watched you save lives with a steadiness that I find, genuinely, one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen." He paused. "I also watched you eat a granola bar standing up in a hospital hallway and call that lunch. And I've watched you lose at every board game you've agreed to play because you approached them too honestly to be strategic. And I've watched you forgive people who disappointed you without announcing the forgiveness, which I think is actually harder than everything else." A small sound from Patrice's direction. "I made a decision 8 months ago that looked, to most people, like sacrifice. I want to tell you, clearly, in front of everyone here, that it was not. It was the most straightforward decision I've ever made. Because the life I had before you was expensive in ways that money doesn't measure. And the life I have now, which is considerably less financially elaborate and contains a great deal more 6 a.m. hospital rounds and insurance documentation, is the only version of my life that has ever felt entirely mine." He looked at her steadily. "I am not going anywhere. Not when it gets hard. Not when the world has opinions about us. Not when you're impossible to argue with, which is frequently." He heard her exhale, brief and uneven, which was Sophie Quinn's version of composing herself. "I am here for all of it. I choose all of it. I choose you." Sophie looked at him for a moment. The room was very quiet. "Aaron Bartlett," she said, "you arrived at a gala where you weren't paying attention and I was. And you said the one thing nobody else had managed to say in 2 years, which was, 'You're right.'" She paused. "I have thought about that a great deal. A small sound of amusement from somewhere. You walked into a hospital at 6 in the morning when you didn't have to. You learned insurance documentation. You learned the saxophone, which, I want it on record, was deeply unexpected and entirely correct. She looked at their hands. You gave up things that most people would not have given up, and you gave them up without requiring me to be grateful, which is the part one needed most. Because love that requires gratitude as proof is not love. It's a transaction. She met his eyes. This is not a transaction. You are not a transaction. What we built, the clinic, this family, the ordinary days and the difficult ones, none of it is a transaction. She breathed. I love you. With the kind of precision I give to things I can't afford to get wrong. A pause. I choose you back. All of it. Forward. The officiant, a friend of Sophie's parents who performed ceremonies on weekends and was visibly moved in a way that suggested this was not his universal experience of the job, declared them married. Aaron kissed Sophie. The room erupted in the specific way of rooms full of people who had been waiting for this and were now deeply, personally satisfied about it. Roland Quinn, in the front row, said something under his breath to his wife Diane that no one else heard. She squeezed his hand. Patrice Holloway was already crying. She had no intention of stopping. Catherine Bartlett, in the third row, pressed 2 fingers to her lips in the particular way of someone holding something in. Then she removed her fingers and, in a room full of people who were clapping, simply smiled, privately, entirely, in the way of someone who had been shown something they thought no longer existed. In the hallway afterward, while guests moved toward the reception, Catherine found Sophie and said simply, "He's different with you. I want you to know that. In 36 years, I've never seen him the way he looks when he's talking about the work you do. About you." She paused. "You gave him that." Sophie looked at this woman, her mother-in-law, a word she was still calibrating, and said, "He brought it with him. I just turned on the lights." Catherine Bartlett blinked. Then, slowly she laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, unexpected. "He said that," she said. "He said exactly that about you." Sophie smiled. "I know." Later, much later, after the dinner and the music and Roland Quinn playing 2 songs that made the whole room feel like it was somewhere warmer than May in Chicago, after Patrice had been persuaded to stop crying and then had started again at the dancing, after Aaron had been formally interrogated by 3 of Sophie's aunts and had answered every question with more honesty than her aunts expected and considerably more warmth than they'd prepared for, they stepped outside for a moment, just the 2 of them, into the night air. Sophie leaned against the building. Aaron stood beside her. The city moved around them in its perpetual indifference to symbolic moments. "How do you feel?" he asked. She looked up at the sky, not at anything in particular, just up, the way people look when they're taking stock. "Like someone who made a bet on something uncertain," she said, "and is looking at the evidence that it's paying off." A pause. "And who is aware that the evidence is early and incomplete? And," she looked at him, "and is paying attention anyway." She took his hand. 100%, she said. "As of tonight." He looked at her for a moment. "The full 100. The full 100. She turned toward the door. "Don't make me regret telling you." "Never." "Good." She pushed open the door. The sound of her father's music came out to meet them. "Come on, Bartlett. My mother is looking for you. She has more food." He followed her back in. Aaron Bartlett had refused to walk away from Sophie Quinn, and in doing so had walked, finally, into the life his grandmother's note had told him to find, the one that was true. He never doubted it. Not once. Not for a single second. Hello, lovers and billionaires. As we draw the curtains for today's story, here's something to take with you. The life that fits you will never cost you as much as the life that doesn't. We spend enormous energy protecting things, money, status, other people's approval, without stopping to ask whether those things are actually keeping us safe or simply keeping us contained. Aaron didn't lose everything when he walked away. He lost the cage and kept himself. And Sophie's lesson runs just as deep. Letting someone prove themselves is not weakness. It is the most precise kind of courage, the willingness to revise your expectations when the evidence earns it. Together, they teach us this. The right love doesn't ask you to shrink. It shows you where you were already small and gives you a reason to grow. Thank you for watching and experiencing this story with me. The emotions, the tension, the quiet moments that say everything. There's so much more still to come, and you don't want to miss what happens next. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, like, and share it with someone who loves stories like this. Your support keeps the story going. See you on the next one.